I first want to say thank you to uh, the other women at Blockchain by Women, Marzanne, Teresa, and Marina. Thank you guys for joining today and for all your efforts in making these events possible. The second thing is I wanted to let everybody know this is as interactive a panel discussion as possible. I know we can't be together in person, but if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And what we'll do is check that as we're going through the discussion and include those questions. And certainly at the end, we'll address any questions that we haven't addressed earlier. And at this point, what I'd like to do is go ahead and get started with introductions. Why don't we start with Emma? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Emma Channing. I'm the founder of the Salus Group, a consultancy that focuses on security tokens.
And for our next panelist, Candice, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Candice Kelly, and I'm the General Counsel at the Stellar Development Foundation, and we support the growth and development of the Stellar Network, which is an open source, decentralized network that's optimized for payments.
And Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris C. I'm the founding director of the Costek project. We focus on the user interface aspect of bringing different protocols together into a cohesive experience. Our entire platform is open source, so we're focusing on connecting and aggregating various protocols into workflows.
Would it be possible to put in the chat the names of the companies, because it was too quick for me? Sorry.
Yes, it's all in the Eventbrite as well. And then Anastasia. Oh, Anastasia, you're on mute.
They're working now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great. Hi, take two. I'm Anastasia Bez. I'm the Director of Operations at Kadena, and we are a blockchain platform that is doing a lot of different things in terms of smart contracts and base layer development.
Great. Thank you all. And I'm Karen, and I founded Blockchain by Women, or co-founded Blockchain by Women to increase diversity as well as education in the space. In addition to Blockchain by Women, I started Blockchain Intel, which we have now expanded into protecting not only blockchains or blockchain applications to now protecting more broadly mobile applications across a number of industries with Appdome. So I'm now with Appdome, and we'd love to talk to you today and get your feedback on these issues around privacy and security regarding both DeFi and crypto applications. And this is because what we've found in discussing with you is that while blockchains themselves have advanced security and privacy features, the applications built on them may not. Last year, it was reported that 1.9 billion was stolen by criminals. Of that, about half were DeFi-related attacks. And so far in 2021, we've seen DeFi projects like Yearn Finance and Meerkat lose, over 40 million to different exploits. What we're seeing is that these hackers and fraudsters are accessing private keys or other sensitive data. And this issue of protecting sensitive data, whether personal, company, or government, has become a bigger issue, especially as central bank digital currency projects have increased around the world. And we've had a few sessions on central bank digital currencies and where that is going, and the issues of security and privacy have come up there. As well as end user and developer concerns. So that's what we wanted to do today is discuss these issues around security and privacy in the context of DeFi and crypto applications. So what I want to do is first start with the underlying issues and talk about the underlying issues in two parts. The first part being fraud attacks, and second being the approach that we take to addressing these issues. So in terms of fraud attacks, what we've seen and what I've heard from a number of companies is that their apps, their applications, their wallets are safe from hackers, and there haven't been any major cases of hacks or breaches. But the reality is, a lot of companies won't want to talk about these things publicly. And this has certainly been true for more traditional financial institutions. But going back to crypto specifically as an example, for a top wallet or application, we saw how this application was hacked into, putting billions of dollars worth of crypto assets at risk. And in this case, a hacker basically was able to get access to account details. They were able to change the passphrase screen of a wallet, making it easy to change the passphrase and therefore get into wallets that held billions of dollars in assets. The hacker was also able to get in the middle of communication and as a result change the exchange rate API. So users would think they needed to send 10 of that particular coin, when in reality they only needed to send 1, given that exchange rate. And the ramifications are not just with the funds that say are stolen, but it's also with the brand that is ruined, the experience that is ruined with a particular application with the company. And so this is where I wanted to turn to our panelists and talk about the approaches. There could be a reactive approach or a proactive approach to this. We have seen actions taken against, for example, SIM swap criminals. And as we watch the exploits around malware, social engineering, and so forth, the question is, how do we prevent these exploits from happening? If we turn to any one of you, the panelists, or Candace, if you want to remark on this, Stellar has $1 billion market cap. You have dozens of wallets and new applications built on Stellar every day. What's your perspective on how users can protect their Lumens and how developers can secure their applications on Stellar?
Sure. So from my perspective, I think there's a lot of education. It's all about education. I feel like in the legal and policy world, we talk a lot about educating policymakers and lawmakers to make sure that we're developing good regulations and laws. But we also, as users and interacting with users, need to make sure that we're educating the users, and in particular with respect to private keys. Because from my perspective, it seems like the old adage of if it looks too good to be true, then it probably is, could probably have protected a lot of the folks who have shared inadvertently or been duped into sharing their private keys. So I think that some of the important things are make sure that everyone understands the power of that private key. Secondly, make sure that they understand all of the different resources that are out there and choices that they have in terms of securing that private key. And certainly making sure that, although I feel like in the crypto world, there have been a lot of freebies and airdrops and things that have maybe conditioned folks to think that things that look too good to be true maybe really do exist in the crypto world. But to stop and really, I think one of the most important parts of the crypto world are the ecosystems surrounding various apps and networks. And that is an incredibly good resource to don't trust, but go investigate. If there is something great and legitimate that's happening, it will be discussed in those channels. And if it's something that's a scam, you will be warned in those channels as well. So I think that those are all really important things. And then as we put out, some guidance on things like, it's all basic security, right? Don't follow links when they come through. The sophistication of some of the websites, the emails, the impersonations on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Telegram are quite good and could fool pretty much anybody. So have your key things bookmarked and type in emails yourself. Put in your the websites and don't follow links, because they really are quite sophisticated and can fool a lot of people. So I think those are all important things. And just that key, once you share it, you can't get it back. So anyway, I'm sure there are others who want to chime in. I'm going on and on, but it's and I think finally, sorry, one last thing, and is that I feel like there is a reluctance to reach out to law enforcement in the crypto world. And that law enforcement can be a very valuable tool. I was a federal prosecutor for over 15 years, so I am slightly biased, but I do think that even if they can't help in a particular situation, making sure that along the way, we are educating law enforcement on how the scammers and how the fraudsters are operating is really critical. And you don't know what they know already, and how one last piece that you're sharing might really just solve a puzzle and enable them to actually bring a case like the SimSwap case that you just mentioned.
Right.
So I'll pause there.
Yeah.
Long answer.
Yeah, and just to support your point there, Candace, I know that there has been a tension sometimes between the crypto community and law enforcement because of the fear of having someone, break into your privacy. But the fact of the matter is, law enforcement, from what I've seen, is really looking to stop the bad guys and not to invade anyone's privacy. And when you look at even the forensics tools that are out there, and we had built one, my company, Blockchain Intel, built one to do that kind of tracking. We were never tracking individuals, right? It was tracking the flow of funds. And the law enforcement that we work with are very careful about not saying this person was linked to a crime unless we had absolutely definitive proof that it was a direct link. So turning to DeFi, Emma and Chris, can you weigh in here and provide a DeFi perspective and on the issues you're seeing? I know you guys had authored an article last year, and things have, some things have changed, but some things have not. So if you could provide a perspective on the DeFi space.
I'll jump in first. One of the challenges with DeFi is the experience level of the developers, and they tend to copy and use libraries which other DeFi projects have put out there in open source, not understanding that it's very hard to audit Solidity in its compounded form. You really need to be auditing down to the bytecode, and a lot of people don't do that. And we've seen hacks on particular DeFi projects following the same flaw in the programming night after night after night, because not only are the DeFi projects not using code, they're not following the hacks, and they're not updating and patching to fix errors that are in the code.
Yeah, I want to expand on that and basically say that the fact that the DeFi market is hot right now means that the engineering market for programmers who can work on DeFis is even tighter than ever before. So previously, you might see project able to secure 2 or 3 developers, however junior they are, at least someone looking over your shoulder. We've seen a lot of projects where there's one developer, like basically be the only person, or the funders and all the project leaders is just putting hopes and dreams on one person to be able to launch something within a month. And when those protocol launch and there is $1 million, $10 million locked in those protocol, that's I think the risk model has increased because of the increased frothiness of the market and the depleting of experienced engineering resource, not only within Solidity, but more so that people with experience in building, kind of like scaled up financial systems are not in the job market to build DeFi, even though the risk models are very similar. So not only for hacks, but also for arbitrage opportunity, not thinking through how someone who can have access to loans or even flash loan, which is amplifying the flaws in any type of rounding errors. That's another aspects that I think should be quite concerned as users of DeFis, that because of the job market is influencing what is being produced.
Okay, so that's a great backdrop, and we'll return to these topics later in looking at, okay, so these are the challenges and issues. What are the potential solutions that developers can have access to if they're not experts? But we'll get to that in a bit. Um, so the next thing we want to talk about is really just how operationally are we, as whether it's consumers or companies, protecting the sensitive data in our wallets, protecting our funds. Now, uh, as companies have begun to accept crypto as payments, or more companies, I should say, are beginning to accept crypto as payment, um, what are the best practices? And I'll give you an example. We have customers that are exchanges, and in our prep call, we talked about how, we would like to accept the crypto as funds, but, we had a discussion around what's the best way to do so. Is it if we want to avoid, say, the volatility, the exchange sends the crypto over or converts the crypto into stablecoin, sends us the stablecoin, and then we liquidate that stablecoin and, don't have to deal with high taxes in that case because it was a stablecoin? Or are there better ways, to approach the issue? And so what I wanted to start with is just what are some of the best practices? What are some of the processes? What are the things you have to think about from a business flow? And Anastasia, since you've been dealing with this, what are your thoughts on receiving crypto as payment and the related business processes?
Thanks. So my perspective is it's actually in a lot of ways easier to receive crypto as payment than to send it out, because with sending it out, you want to make sure that you're securing, the flow of your funds out of a business. So you maybe want to have like multiple people signing off on something, whereas something coming in, you want to make sure that you have a secure place for the funds to arrive and what type of funds they are. So I think that there are several different options. You can go with something like an exchange if you want to, a lot of exchanges have corporate accounts, which have some protection. I don't know that a ton of them have like really great permissioning for multiple users to have different levels of permissions, which is sort of a concern, I think. Another option is you can set up your own wallet, and you can have that wallet be a multi-signature wallet. So something like Gnosis would be an example where like funds can come into it, but for funds to leave, there has to be multiple people that sign off on a transaction. And I think that that is really important in terms of like the difference between accepting, a more volatile currency or a stable coin. I personally tend to prefer stable coins. Like, so USDC would be a good example, but I can understand that a business that might have like different risk profiles might find it compelling to want to, take payment in Ethereum or Bitcoin or something like that. I mean, I just think that that's something that you would also want to discuss with your like accounting team about what the volatility is going to do for your tax payments and what happens if the price goes down, and does that impact, your overall ability to operate a business.
Yeah, so that's great. And so if a company, let's say, wanted to accept crypto, what are the KYC AML obligations? Because, if you just accept crypto, that's great. You don't have to deal with any kind of volatility, exchange fee, exchange issues. And so Candace, to address KYC and AML, what's your perspective and thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, so I think that companies really do have to think that through, and many companies don't have any obligations to do KYC AML as a regulated entity, but because if you're accepting over Rails, for example, if you get a payment over the Stellar Rails, you don't have that information. You don't have that intermediary, the bank or someone else who's doing that for you to give you that comfort that you know where these funds are coming from. So depending on who you're dealing with, well, I think in any case, we certainly do KYC no matter what, whether we're sending out or bringing funds in, to make sure that we run all those checks. So it is another burden that the company would have to take on and make sure that they understand what that means and what that entails, how to actually run KYC. And then certainly being able to do that means not only worrying about the security of the funds coming in, but the security of that very sensitive personal information that you have to collect to be able to run KYC. So having secure channels to send that and secure channels to communicate about the wallet address is sort of another piece of making sure that you're doing this all in a way that you don't end up exposing someone's personal private information, whether it's their KYC information or information regarding their wallets, if they haven't made the connection between who owns that public address.
And so
And sorry, one last thing is obviously that we always do also send a small test transaction before we do a larger transaction. Just there's always that risk, and because transactions are so quick and easy and inexpensive, like once you have done all of your checks, still do a small test transaction and before you send the larger transaction. And certainly what Anastasia was saying about multi-sig, I think is also very important protection.
yes. And so we have a question from the audience. Is it possible for a hacker to latch onto a user and the user might inadvertently allow access to network? So yes, absolutely. This happens not only in crypto or with blockchain applications, but with payment applications, with more traditional financial services applications. And and what we're going into next will be the ways that you can address this issue. A lot of the problems with inadvertently allowing access is through providing information, confidential information that wasn't meant to be leaked or meant to be shared. And talking to the other women from on the team here who have work in security, I mean, this is an issue for all security professionals, and is something that you can address with a number of solutions. And so what I wanted to do is start to go through that because it is something that developers have to address as they're building their applications. And that's actually part of our next question, which is, how can developers secure the applications they're building? What are the things they need to watch out for, even if they think they have a solution? For example, they may be using encryption to like the question was about, getting access to confidential information. There may be encryption that you can use to encrypt the user details, and that way the hacker can't get access to the network if they don't have the user details. But that encryption might be useless if the hacker gets your credentials or tricks you into giving those credentials, right? And that is the problem with a lot of the private keys that have been inadvertently shared. There are challenges with not only sharing those private keys or the credentials, but the hackers or the fraudsters could slow down the application or the transmission of the data. And there are a number of ways basically that an application can protect. There are a number of ways to attack the application. So things like encryption, which may address part of the problem, will protect data at rest, but you have to look at how to protect the connections. So protecting the data is one thing, protecting the application itself is another thing, and then protecting the communication between the application and the backend is yet another thing. And all those can be addressed by security technologies, and I'm happy to go into more of them with you, but wanted to just go to the panelists now to talk about what they have seen as working in terms of how developers can develop the apps and secure their code development. Is it that they rely on certain tools? Are there places to go to, best practices? That's one question. And then the second question is around smart contracts in particular. Are audits good enough, especially as many of the projects, the DeFi projects, have been hacked? And the last one is about mobile applications in particular, and how to protect mobile applications. So wanted to just open it up a bit and have a broader discussion with the panel. And then I'll also share some of the things that we've seen. So Chris, did you want to weigh in from the developer perspective first?
Sure. I think we need a Hippocratic oath for blockchain and smart contract developer, which is first do no harm. There's a lot of very aggressive innovation going on here, and security audit seems to be, and someone will edit my draft and make my grammar perfect, versus being careful about how you construct it, as if the language you're describing, whether it's in English or Solidity, can be fixed at the end. And I think this idea of being careful upfront and choosing upstream libraries, for example, Anastasia mentioned Gnosis Safe, which is a consumer-facing multi-signature wallet that you can use to manage simple funds, ETH or DAI. But Gnosis, the organization, is actually creating extension capability with Gnosis Safe, so the application can be built to take advantage of the multi-signature capability. Let's say you need 2 out of 3 people to sign before funds get moved. It can also be 2 out of people can sign before we do the trade, or 2 out of 3 before we unlock the escrow. So I think there's some great primitives in this space where if developers take on that oath and say, hey, first do no harm, let me know what are reliable medicines that I should use as my treatment, and then start from there versus let me open the text editor and code my dream, right? That would actually help a lot. It's an orientation towards safety first versus kind of feature first. I think that would be something that would be hopefully sellable to developer, because they do get a lot from these platforms like Gnosis Safe infrastructure that they don't have to code themselves, but it requires more education and more awareness that these tools are available and they should be reviewed and considered as building blocks.
And to add to that, when you're talking about something like inadvertently allowing access to the network or accessibility, there's a number of ways to check for those kinds of what are known as man-in-the-middle attacks. And so what you can do is look at, a session, check if the certificates are valid, check if the certificates have been secured, check the connection, the SSL connection itself, so there's a number of ways to make sure that the connection between an end user and the network is secure. And technologies like Aptones can address it, but there are a number of others out there as well. There is another question here. Are DeFi hacks occurring due to the fact that the dApps are not programmed well? And yes, so I think Emma and Chris, you addressed this earlier. Do you want to go into that a little bit more about how the dApps are not programmed well? Or some of them, so not all of them?
Those that have been, a large proportion of those that have been attacked are known defects in the code, and the developers are not maintaining the code base and not keeping an eye out for attacks and then maintaining the code to actually fix for errors. When you see hacks hack several protocols over a period of days and or weeks, that's not good coding, that's sloppy coding.
And so going on to our next question here around how end users and fintechs can say secure trading in particular, because the transactions are, for us, what is the biggest issue many times is how can we secure the trading functionality specifically? And for example, we've been talking to a number of developers who are concerned about code injection. For example, a program executable file being injected into the code. And this can cause a number of issues. It can cause some of the things we talked about earlier, where the passphrase screen or the authentication process itself is jeopardized. And this can be a task that is performed by debuggers and emulators. So the hackers may be using the exact same tools that the developers have used to create the applications. And that's a problem because, you know, these fraudsters can then kind of hide their tracks. They're obviously more advanced and are using tools and know where exactly an application will break. And so the issue is, you know, if you have a fraudster who knows all your secret doors, what can you do to defend against that? Now, there are technologies like ours out there to address that, but what are the common things that you want to watch out for? Are there particular detection, prevention techniques that you see are best practices? And, you know, how do you contain them and mitigate the issues here? Um, so I'll lean on you, Chris, here as a developer. Do you have a set of places you go to, or just general guidelines that you have for trading and those types of things in particular?
I think when you are operating across different blockchains, both with wallet that you control and wallet that you that's hosted custodial, one of the most important thing is a operations guide for the team. So the practices such as the one you mentioned about sending a test transaction, I think that's a good practice. The ability to follow certain steps and making sure that you do a backup in a certain way, or if you were to back up a key, do it in a certain way. It's very hard for everybody who come into the field or part of the team, developers or non-developers, to automatically know the same set of practices because the practices are changing all the time. So I think there is one function, which is people in a team researching, understanding what the best practices are, and codifying those practices. So when people were doing a trade or doing a contract upgrade, if it's more technical, or doing some plannings for creating new keys or rotating keys, so assuming you're doing a multi-sig wallet, you could rotate the wallet to control that same funds. Those practices needs to be written down and needs to be executed and tested periodically. And I think that's the best way to do it. So what I'm basically saying, there's no magic bullet, but we can certainly write down what is the best practice and iterate and make that part of the business process to improve not only the understanding of the best practices, but the exercising within internally and the consequences of being able to say, hey, did we just had a close call? How would we change our plan and codify and let that be followed? So I think that's how maybe it may not be the most magical solution, but this is what we've seen as something that has worked, at least for us. I'm curious to get Anastasia's thought on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that best practices are not improvising. That's where danger comes in this sort of stuff, is like if you are feeling pressured in either like creating an application or doing some sort of financial transaction, that's where the margin for error gets higher, both in terms of user error or in terms of like, you know, con games that are happening and scams, like all of that goes up. And so it's sort of like having a framework that everyone knows and adheres to is important. And it's also like integrating security into part of your company culture. Like it's not just something for developers, it's something that everyone needs to be doing. And like, it's not just about, you know, financial transactions. It's about having, you know, multi-factor authentication on your emails. It's about making people use YubiKeys, and just like all of these things like are individual things that maybe do a little bit and maybe they're not the one solution, but altogether they create a stronger ecosystem. And I would also echo what Candace had said earlier about education and just sort of about like understanding that people can be resources, and people love to talk about security and they love to talk about, you know, what their thoughts are on risks and best practices. And I think especially in crypto, a lot of people are willing to share that and to offer help. And so people being siloed is really a danger. So improvisation and silos, bad. Ecosystem and planning and procedure is good. So that's my follow-up. I agree with you.
Yeah. So to take it back to end users, since we're all probably using and storing our own crypto, and kind of going back to the spectrum, right, of how some of us, you know, there are many of us that are our own banks, so to speak. all the way up to, the institutions that have custodians. But for those of us that are our own banks, just what is, if you could share, what are some of the things that you do? Do you split up your funds as a best practice across multiple wallets, both, both hard wallets or offline cold wallets, as well as hot wallets online? Do you have a certain amount that you put in, various types of wallets? So yeah, if you could just share sort of what are the common things that you've found, or I shouldn't say the common things, the things that you have found to be useful and when storing, your own assets. Anyone want to jump in and share?
I mean, I have some thoughts, but I just spoke, so I want to give other people an opportunity if they have thoughts too.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think, so I don't know how familiar people are. I mean, probably the panel is familiar, but other people with Glacier Protocol, but it's basically an open source document that has a lot of different security choices that you can make in terms of securing a lot of different things. And I think that that provides like a pretty comprehensive overview for people who are of a variety of skill sets and like just sort of specialties to sort of look at what their choices are. But I do think that diversifying where you store crypto so that you don't have a single point of failure is extremely important. I think using a combination of different access points and access methods. So like you said, like cold storage, different things, and being aware of when you're storing something in a higher risk place, what you're doing to mitigate that risk. Like there may be a reason that you want to keep something on an exchange in their wallet so that you have easy access to it. But like there's a trade-off there. And it may be worth it, but it's dangerous if you're not aware of that and you think that that's just a super secure place that you're storing all your funds.
I think another thing, going back to how you started, Karen, with the SIM swap example, I think that folks should really be aware of what SIM swapping is. Using a voice over IP number as one of your multi-factor authentications as opposed to your phone number, I think is a pretty simple way to try and combat that threat. And I think it's something that folks just don't really know about. Certainly we have a pretty comprehensive onboarding when people come as new employees. Some of them are engineers and have been in the crypto space. Some of them have very little background. And so we've put together a lot of these best practices that go, as Anastasia said, not just to crypto and your crypto wallets, but your email, your securing your devices, everything. I think that it's just an area that people often think about. And, it starts with just make sure you have you don't use your birthday for your password, or reuse those same passwords. They're really basic things that are true across all of our digital lives at this point. And I think that people listen to it and they think, oh yeah, I should do that. And then they don't actually do it. So I think it's just being vigilant and listening and heeding all of those best practices that are pretty readily available, I think, in terms of just general digital lives.
And so we have a question from the audience on how can the blockchain be used by people without them knowing it? Private keys, public keys, etc. I think it's going to, the evolution of where we are with blockchain, where, right now we're talking about private keys and things like that. But in the future, all this will maybe very well a detail, that isn't exposed to end user. And certainly blockchain technology can offer more than just, say funds transfer. And we will be able to do more with blockchain technology without having to know, the nitty gritty details of private keys and public keys. So maybe if you guys could share some of the applications you've been seeing, or maybe the work that's been done in your various communities, whether it's at Kadena or Chris, with the developers you're working with, or Candace over at Stellar, and Emma, with the community that you've been leading, what are you seeing as broader uses of blockchain technology that may not require this, say, onerous look at private keys and things like that? Yeah.
Well, I will start with just a big picture comment on that question, which is I think that is the future of blockchain. I think that is what developers need to be thinking about, which is people want to have applications that solve a problem for them. They don't want to have to jump through a lot of hoops. They don't want to have to learn a new technology. And it's fantastic that there are all of these really smart engineers and developers who are creating solutions to everyday problems. But for them to focus on this very question, which is how do we give the solution, give people the control, the solution to whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve without, there have to be a certain amount of education, but not turning them into experts on blockchain technology. Like if I can do something, if I can send money across a border and have no idea that it's blockchain, to me, that's a great solution. And that's something that developers really need to think about. One of the things that we have a subsidiary that's working on a self-hosted wallet and spent a lot of time on the question of private keys and making sure that something can be non-custodial, but also not put entirely the burden on the user. So essentially, in very layman's terms, so Chris will cringe at how I say this, but essentially the key is broken in two places, right? So no one entity has it, but if you lose your key, you're able to call into two different places to reestablish and create and move your funds into a new account, and you as the user get the new key. So that user doesn't need to really understand; they just need to know what the process is, and then on the back end, it's been designed in a way so you're not relying on one entity who would have, obviously, in that if it was just one entity, they would be custodial because they'd have control. So it's just thinking that way and designing things with the user and not a crypto savvy, a technology savvy user in mind, but someone who has a problem that wants a simple, fast, cheaper solution to it, I think is really critical in sort of blockchain being developed and more in the mainstream, is making it less at the front and center of what the app is.
Yeah, I totally agree with it. I think this generation of wallet, maybe the previous generation included, reminds me of these hot rod cars where there's a hole in the middle of the hood and then you can see the engine in it, and then you wonder, why do I need to see the engine? Then you realize those car manufacturers, the person who designed the engine owns the company. So they want to show you the amazing moving parts within the engine as part of showing off their creation. Right? But that's not how we want to drive a car. We want to start button, put it in drive, and then step on the gas. In Tesla, you press on the brakes, they close the door for you, right? So I think the idea of usability is about really hiding, not because we don't want to see it, it's because you don't need to see it. You want people to focus on something else, focus on the application, focus on the social aspects of it, because the people you trust to get one of your key shards are your friends, and they're going to help you if you forget your password, right? These are more important than just writing down the keys. So I think there's a new genesis of new wallets, and we're working on one ourselves around how do we reimagine a wallet as the best mobile app you've ever used versus how do we make the best mobile wallet, right? That's subtle semantics, but very different focus of where you're starting from. And I think if we can make an application focusing on what people are doing with blockchain and smart contract, and then kind of thinking like a car designer who's like, I don't want all these gears and levers like the Model T to start the car, and cranking the engine doesn't make any sense. Like, what is the best experience? And then start there. I think the technology pieces are actually in place with all the things that is mentioned about multi-party computation, private key social recovery, multi-sig signature. These are all things that can just be, oh, I got 2 of my friends to like my post. If I get 3, I get 3 out of 5, and then this thing goes, right? It could be as simple as an emoji to show the thumbs up as a multi-sig transaction. same exact infrastructure what Anastasia talked about underneath it. And that, I think, is why the user experience aspect is something we're focusing on at CardStack, because I think that's really the genesis or the unlocking of new possibility space of what we can use this thing to get like mass market adoption beyond people already know crypto.
Anastasia, Emma, what are the applications you have seen that have gone, beyond some of the security issues that we have addressed and kind of hidden that, so to speak, from the users?
One that's been in the news lately, Cadena worked on figuring out some prototypes on COVID vaccine tracking, but New York State has implemented something different that does also involve blockchain. And there's some pretty serious concerns about that. But in that, I would say it's actually the opposite extreme of blockchain is so hidden in that application that it's not fully clear fully how like people's data is being handled and how people can access their data safely, but how other people maybe also can. And I think it's a great example of blockchain not being used like at the front and center, but perhaps it overcorrected a bit too far. I think that apps like that, though, like ideas where it's not just financial transactions, it's things like, authentication as a service, but you don't need to necessarily understand the concept of a private key, a public key, and all of this stuff. Like you have lots of apps on your phone that will authenticate things. And that's just a back-end function. So I think I agree that there's a lot of, the usability, the user experience. I mean, I had a discussion recently with a family member who had been hearing about NFTs in the news and was like, how do I do this? I don't own any crypto, but I'm interested in making art. And so I think that figuring out how to get people to be able to like onboard quickly or not have to have a deep understanding is really important just for like increased access. And there are ways of doing it, but you have to put that as the first priority instead of, like Chris said, the shiny engine with a hole to look at it.
And Emma?
In securities, we don't need the distributed nature of Ethereum or another blockchain. We generally recommend a private network for our security clients. So you're able to resolve custody issues that way, where people are self-custodying, but they're self-custodying on the platform.
So then, so my question to all of you is, in the future, then do you see the security that we've been talking about, the measures that we talked about, kind of managed or put in a black box, and really sort of a module that developers incorporate so that they can focus on the features, the user experience, the other use cases? Do you think, just as you look towards the future, do you see that being where things are headed?
I think security is always going to be an issue. I just don't see it going away.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of sort of competing priorities and tensions that are going to continue to be wrangled with, but it's good to wrangle with them because that's how you come out with a more refined version of what you actually need and sort of synthesize that. I don't see it being resolved and then suddenly we all just say, okay, no more security concerns.
I think what's going to happen with a blockchain, especially smart contract-based decentralized app, is that there's going to be more of a drift. Right now, projects will do the smart contract, sometimes even the blockchain underneath, and the wallet and the user interface on the web at the same time. And they iterate pretty much on the same cycle because you have to build everything yourself. We're already seeing with like a decentralized exchange like Uniswap, where Uniswap has an official user interface, right? Go to uniswap.org, you can click on that. But there are other products that are using Uniswap as one of the function within some other tool, maybe a payment tool or games or something like that. And those has different security concerns. Not less, just different. But I think we're going to start seeing kind of like how the oil and water separate, where the protocols start moving a bit slower. And with people who are focusing on providing a utility that's reliable and secure and and paranoid in approach. And then you have a faster moving substrate on top of that, that is people innovating on user tools and stuff like that, leveraging those protocol. That's not happening right now because everything's still getting built out like vertically, like a little kind of bazaar of like a city being built out. But I do believe the infrastructure will sink underground, like reliable infrastructure like Wallet Connect or Gnosis Safe in the Ethereum space end up being like just like a thing like plug into the wall and it comes. And the security and the risk profile depends on which of the layer, your above ground, below ground, will change. The same way you don't worry about someone going to your data center because you don't have one, right? You're using Amazon Web Service and they deal with physical security of people getting in and out of the data center buildings, right? I think similar types of segregation of security risk and expertise will happen in this space as the layers separate. I think it's a good thing. I think allow people to focus their efforts and choose their best practices without knowing everything all the time, which is what is necessary right now to thrive and survive in this space.
Right. And we're seeing that too. I mean, as everything is, going towards being on a mobile wallet or a mobile application, the technologies that are being developed that we're developing, others are developing, are increasingly focused on handling these crypto, DeFi, whatever use cases. And those nuances are very interesting, but that's how we're keeping ahead. And we're very, passionate and determined to make sure that, we're protecting all the individuals and all the companies that have this. But that's, that's our mission, and that's the focus that we have, and other companies are like us doing that. So wanted to end on one question here in terms of where you think regulation is going, and are there potential regulatory, whether it's guidance or new regulations coming out that will make crypto and DeFi safer? What do you think are the good intentions and potentially unintended consequences? And I know there are some folks from the regulatory world on this call, so if you want to weigh in, have some, ask some questions here and make some comments, please do. And I might call on Val later on to share a few thoughts here too. So yeah, any of you panelists want to speak on? Oh, good, great.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I think that there are a lot of well-intentioned proposals. I think that, as I said earlier, education and making sure that the folks who are creating these regulations and going to try and implement them really understand what the technology can and can't do. For example, the FinCEN's NPRM, which they just closed their comment period the second time on Monday, having a reporting requirement like a CTR type requirement is something that it would place a huge burden on virtual asset service providers, and it would put a ton of sensitive data in a database that FinCEN has to control and secure. And the value of that is really unclear because that information, the transaction information, is immutable on at least on transparent public ledgers, which is what I can speak to given my familiarity with the Stellar network. So things like that, I think, are meant to have better AML CFT controls, but are maybe not really understanding, the value, because there, from a law enforcement, having been a prosecutor from a perspective, being able to use the tools that are available to analyze a blockchain and not even know who is behind these wallets, to be able to see the patterns and find suspicious activity to create leads and to figure out where you want to focus your attention, I think is a much more valuable way to really use this technology for good. And so I think both putting the burden, and I think that one thing that I've found very encouraging in the last couple of months is both the Biden administration and also the FATF having more of a focus on how new regulations might affect financial inclusion, and making that really front and center and something that has to be analyzed in every rulemaking because I think that that has fallen by the wayside in the kind of quest for more and stricter AML, KYC, CFT type regulations. So I think that working together with industry is critical, that the public sector and the private sector need to work together to really understand the technology, understand the threats that we're trying to address, and reach that balance. So there are plenty of other examples, but that's sort of my big picture take of where we are right now. But very encouraged that there is consultation going on with FATF. I think FinCEN has really engaged since the beginning of the year with private industry to try and make sure that the knowledge and trust gap between the private sector and the public sector is narrowed.
Karen, this is Val. Thanks for inviting me to speak and especially just inviting me to listen in. I think this is an incredibly important conversation, and thank you to Blockchain by Women for hosting. I would just say, I think regulatory agencies, most of them have financial innovation hubs like ours. Our FinHub was just elevated to its own office, and we're excited about that. And we would just encourage people to come in and talk to us about some of these issues, help educate us. We do have a couple pieces out there for public comment, the most recent being the Commission's statement about special purpose broker dealers providing services to customers for digital asset securities. And there are a number of questions in there for public input. So I would encourage those who want to either submit something in writing or just come and talk to us to reach out and do that. And we're really excited to hear about the technical solutions to some of these problems, which from our perspective are safety and soundness of assets are key in our area. So thank you again for inviting me. And I'm sorry I have to drop off right at 1 o'clock, but carry on your great discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And probably reach out, because as we're seeing globally, a lot of the regulation around mobile devices has come up. For example, the Reserve Bank of India has subpoenaed foreign entities to investigate security measures into fraudulent mobile banking related transactions. And there's a lot of the DeFi crypto transactions are on mobile devices. This is, of interest as well. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority and Monetary Authority of Singapore followed up with the same request. So we're seeing these regulatory authorities around the world put the onus of this transaction security back on financial institutions, whether they're banks, whether they're crypto related companies, and so we'll look forward to continuing that discussion like Val talked about. Emma, did you want to add something?
No, I mean, I think my focus at the moment is on the updated FATF guidance and making sure that FATF isn't regulating technology as opposed to regulating behavior. And GBC will be putting out a comment response to that.
Okay. So any parting thoughts for anyone from the panel? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your thoughts today. I look forward to keeping up with you in our next sessions. Would like to hear from you in the audience if you'd be interested in the following sessions we have coming up. And those include, number one, a more technical or hands-on workshop where we delve into some of the technologies we just talked about and how we can address the security issues. That's one. We look to do that with some system integrators and partners in that space. And the second is to have a discussion around rewards. That's been a great incentive to get a number of people, to users and others, to adopt cryptocurrencies and digital assets. So we'll talk about rewards. And the other item we have on the agenda is a session on developers in blockchains and what they're developing, how they came to be developing blockchains. And so we'll send out those options coming up, and would just love to hear from you in terms of, you know, what you would like to understand, questions you have, who else you'd like to hear from. So once again, thank you all for joining, and I look forward to working with you, listening to you, and learning from all of you in the future.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.